This is a Media Lab podcast. Dave, where did you get that black eye?
The first rule is that I can't tell you where I got this black eye.
Did you just go to your Shriners meeting again? It's not that secretive, Dave.
Shriner or Shiner?
In his own garage, Kyle has built a machine, cobbled together with parts found in his friend's church basement and a dumpster behind the local Dairy Queen. This monstrosity is now alive and evil. Kyle has convinced his friend Dave to help stop the apocalypse by reviewing films the machine picks. The ultimate purpose is still unknown, and Kyle could have probably done this himself, but he's not being dragged to hell alone. This is Kyle and Dave versus the machine.
Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine. My name is Kyle.
My name is David.
And I'm the machine.
A podcast where a sentient machine forces us to watch movies in order to prevent it from initiating the apocalypse. Although we do tend to talk about the ideas of the movie rather than the movie itself. For whatever reason, the movie is very obsessed with the year 1999. That is what we are moving through here this season.
Machine.
Today,
The machine.
The Machine. What did I say?
The movie.
Today, we're going to be watching the film Fight Club.
Sweet.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can. Why? How much can you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight.
Wait, let me start earlier. Like many of you, I was stuck.
You want me to deprioritize my current reports until you advise of a status upgrade?
Make these your primary action items.
I couldn't sleep.
No, you can't die from insomnia.
I'd flip through catalogs and wonder, what kind of dining set defines me as a person? This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. I prayed for a different life.
Soap. I make and I sell soap.
And this is how I met Tyler Durden.
Come on, hit me.
All right, so Dave, what is your history with this movie?
This is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Oh, very bold. You would say that as a man.
I would say that as an angsty person.
Was this a theater movie for you? Did you see this in theaters?
Saw this in theaters. I owned it, pretty sure on VHS originally, owned it on DVD. Have talked myself out of getting the Blu-ray because the DVD still worked. And just had a check on iTunes, see how much it would cost to have it streaming. But
I mean, if you can't see Brad Pitt's abs in 4K HD, why even own this movie?
It's not just his abs, Kyle. It's his hip bones.
I know.
It's gorgeous.
Okay, I was going to wait till later in the episode to bring this up. And I don't know why we talk about my crushes so often on this podcast. There must be some innate thing that I need to talk about this stuff. I know that Brad Pitt is often looked at as being like the perfect man. At least when we were growing up, it was like he was like shorthand for like beautiful person.
Adonis.
I was actually never a Brad Pitt guy. Like I was like whatever, fine. Like I could tell like why people thought he was attractive. The only movie I've ever found him like right up my alley was this movie, which says so much about me that I don't care to admit, probably. This is the dirty, grungy,
yeah, you like the grit.
Smoking, cut guy. I'm just like, yeah, okay, I can see that. I can see why.
Who doesn't like to get it deep down and dirty, man?
Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine After Dark.
Remember when radio was a thing? All right, let's keep going.
One of your favorite movies, saw it in theaters, bought it in a bunch of different formats. What was it about this movie that was like, this is amazing?
I mean, in 1999, I think that I was in a deeply introspective, existential, philosophical mode. Unlike now. Now I'm just a calm, gentle soul. And this movie just hit every thematic, visual, acting, directorial. It just hit it across the board for me. I mean, I didn't know it then, but apparently I'm a huge David Fincher fan. Because I like pretty much everything he's ever made. If he touches it, I will probably like it, which is...
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I'm a big David Fincher fan, too. Whatever his aesthetic is, however you want to define that, I'm kind of on board. I did not see this film in 1999. I don't know if you know this, but the theater in my small town burnt down, Dave.
What?
And I know. This is hilarious. I didn't see this film until circa 2002, somewhere around there in university. By the way, I mentioned this a few weeks ago about there being like these 3 movies that were like these university films. I think it was during the Run Lola Run episode. Anyways, the movie I couldn't think of was this movie. This is the movie we watched so many times through university. Before then, I recall being on, I want to say it was a band trip or something where we were on a bus for school. And my friend, Brian Magnus, who was always like he was a great storyteller. Like he was able to like make me bust my gut. He was able to like infuse things that was like, the story is true, but you have greatly embellished this story to make it funnier or better. Anyways, he was saying, have you seen this movie Fight Club? I'm like, well, I've heard of it. Like, I don't know anything about it. He proceeded to tell me the entire plot of the movie. Excellent. But what he liked to focus on was the fact, so there's this part, right, where what he does is he inserts cocks into movies. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, he cuts out like one frame and puts it in. But then I was watching the movie, and then during the credits, there was like, whoop, this little blip. I was like, what is that? And so I rewound it, and I push pause, and it's a big cock. I was like, oh, okay. Now I was super intrigued, like, well, I need to see this movie, but I can't justify my parents getting this movie for us to watch. They would probably say no.
Who doesn't need to see a big cock in the middle of a film?
Who doesn't? Fast forward 2002, watched the first time, like, lo and behold, like, oh, yeah, that was a cock that just flashed in my face. And crazy how you can actually cut out something for literally one frame and still your brain registers, oh, I saw something.
At least at 24 frames a second.
At least 24 frames per second. That's right.
60 hertz shit is garbage. Keep going.
So yeah, I mean, that was basically my like, I knew what the story was. I knew like the big twist of this movie because Brian told it to me in great detail about how the movie. And then I watched it during university and fell in love too. By this point, I'm pretty sure Fincher had already, well, I knew I'd seen Seven already. Oh, I'd seen The Game as well. I'd seen, which I think low-key is a great movie.
Amazing
I love
movie.
The Game.
Yeah.
And Panic Room, I think, came out really close around 2002.
Yeah.
And so I saw that in theaters. So I was like, oh, like this is a director that I want to follow and see what's going on. Now, with that being said, it has, this seems to be a recurring theme. It's probably been over a decade since I've seen this film.
I'm pretty sure I've watched it more recently. You know, I do remember, speaking of Brad Pitt quickly, I don't know if we should keep this whole thing in the intro. I was not a big Brad Pitt fan. As I typed up our little essay for this episode, it turns out I am a Brad Pitt fan, but I'm pretty sure I watched this movie because of Ed Norton. And
oh, yeah, 100%.
Because I was a big...
There was something about it, like growing up, Brad Pitt was just a very different actor than what I think he's perceived as now.
Yeah.
He was that pretty boy. He was trying to be like a romantic, dramatic lead. And I don't know if it really fit him. I think he's actually found his like calling in his like 40s and into his 50s now, where it's like, oh no, he's figured out his groove and what he actually excels in.
Grit and comedy, surprisingly.
Oh yeah. Like he's very funny. The way that he drags, like my favorite thing was this last award season where he basically got Best Supporting Actor at every major award show, including the Oscars. Every acceptance speech, he would get up here and like, let me just give a roast to Quentin Tarantino, to Margot Robbie, to Leonardo DiCaprio. And like that was his acceptance speech. I'm like, I could see you doing this for longer term. Plus, I mean, as a lot of people will say, what he has done with his own production company, try to push out emerging voices, basically like people of color, that kind of stuff. Like he's really a big champion of those types of filmmakers. And I think that's something to be respected. Let's go and thank some sponsors. And then when we return, we'll have watched Fight Club and we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Hi, everyone. Just Kyle here again. Letting you know about some of our sponsors who help make this show possible. You know, someone should probably just punch me in the face right now because I feel about that good. I've had about 2 hours of sleep. But the show must go on, mustn't it, folks? I look forward to the rest of my day where I can barely string 2 words together, or as they like to call it in my house, Friday. So first and foremost, Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation. Whether it's funding anti-racism programs, addiction recovery, or food hampers for the hungry, for 65 years, the Calgary Foundation has proudly supported the charitable community to address some of Calgary's biggest challenges. Now, during this period of unprecedented urgent needs, Calgary Foundation renewed its commitment to building a healthy, vibrant, giving, caring, and resilient community. If you're a registered charity looking for a grant, a professional advisor creating a giving plan for your client, or a donor wanting to give back to community, discover a wealth of resources at calgaryfoundation.org and learn more about their work through Calgary Foundation's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. This week, we're also brought to you by ATB, and I want to talk to you about a new initiative from our friends at ATB called ATB Goodness Grows. Hashtag ATB Goodness Grows is an initiative that motivates Albertans to bring joyful moments to others. We're all adjusting to being disconnected from the places, people, and experiences we love, so making someone laugh or bringing a smile to their day has never been more needed or more powerful. From live streams connecting business owners to new and fun ways to celebrate things like Father's Day, ATB hopes to inspire Albertans to keep the goodness growing. To find out more or to get involved, visit atb.com/COVID-19/community.
You sure you don't have COVID? Are you okay?
Well, I just ate like a lunch quickly, and now it's like all acid refluxing up here with me. Dave, honestly, I was a little bit worried because I was like, oh, this is probably going to be one of those movies I return to and be like, why did I ever like this movie? Spoiler alert, I think there's a lot to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about this movie. Let's do this. What are your just initial, overall, non-spoilery thoughts on the movie Fight Club?
Awesome. Classic. We'll watch again. Top to bottom, I didn't take a single note because I got entirely enwrapped in watching for the 1 millionth time.
I know.
And even knowing and expecting what will happen next, I'm still engaged in it. I mean, that tells me everything about a movie, at least speaking how it speaks to me. I was enamored with it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned this, I think a few weeks ago too, about how when I have no urge to actually look at my phone, I'm watching this movie and I'm engrossed by it. I can tell that that's something that's working on me. I noticed this time on this rewatch, it breaks a lot of rules that you're not supposed to use in filmmaking, and yet it really works here. Because I think there's a broader point that they're trying to make, basically meaning narrator and unreliable protagonist are kind of the two big ones that people like. Don't use that in your filmmaking. It works in novels and books, but it doesn't really work in filmmaking because of the different formats. But because I think the thesis of this movie and what it's trying to say, it really does add up to when you get to that finale where it's like, boy, does that hit you like a ton of bricks. I will say as well that I think this is a movie kind of like The Matrix, and there's probably a better example out there where there is a huge piece of the fandom around this movie that I think only looks at the text and not the subtext, and then kind of puts their personality around that, because I don't think that the character that Brad Pitt is playing, Mr. Tyler Durden, is a cool character. I think you think he is as you are introduced to him, and then you slowly learn over time, oh, this is like a bad dude and not a good guy at all. And I think that the people who just look at the text are like, Tyler is cool, I'm going to live by his life philosophy, and like that's what I'm going to do with my life. When the movie itself is saying don't, because his philosophy is stupid. I don't know what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that if you pressed pause or stop halfway through this movie, you think that Tyler Durden is almost a nihilistic, Buddhistic representation of counterculture.
Right.
But if you leave the theater watching this movie and you think that becoming Tyler Durden in its entirety is still a positive thing, then there's something wrong with you, because you're likely a terrorist in a very broad sense of that word, right?
It's maybe very obviously a terrorist.
Yeah. And that word has taken on certain tones in the last 20 years. But I think there's so much intent to... Are we not allowed to talk about what happens in this movie? This is frustrating.
We're going to do that. But we're going to do that after.
And this rewatch, I really enjoyed watching everybody interplay with each other with the knowledge of what was going to happen, and noticing little things like Helena Bonham Carter's character, how she is
Marla Singer.
Marla Singer. How Marla Singer is interacting with the world. When I first watched it, I thought she was just an insane person.
Right.
And now I watch it and I'm like, she's like pretty normal, other than being distressed.
How do I make you distressed?
Around what's happening and reacting. And it's fascinating, those little nuances, but how intentional everything is. Even after watching it 15, 20, 200 times. I keep catching little things that draw my interest into it. So if you're watching this movie and all you see is a really cut, handsome dude miming Bruce Lee and looking cool in old beat-up polyester Hawaiian shirts, then you need to seek psychiatric help.
You've just described my exact type.
That is not what this movie's about.
I think you're right, and this is a hard movie to talk about without spoiling it, so we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to go through some backstory here, which is this. Fight Club was released on October 15th, 1999. There was a few other films released that day, but the major one is probably The Straight Story, written by John Roach and Mary Sweeney, directed by David Lynch, and starring Richard Farnsworth, Sissy Spacek, and Harry Dean Stanton. Fight Club is currently rated 8.8 on IMDb, 66 on Metacritic, and over on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 173 critics, it's at 79%. And with 1,093,666 users, it's rated 96%. So I think there is definitely a huge gap here between what the critics thought and what I think audiences thought about this movie.
I had this thought that we should back check all the movies we've done and look at how many user comments there are per movie. I might have brought this up earlier, but over 1 million says a lot more than 96%. That is a lot of impassioned people.
Right.
Getting on and logging in and writing messages. It's fascinating.
Well, that means that, a vast majority of those are rating it over 90%, just to get it that high, right? It is available on DVD or Blu-ray. You can buy or rent it on iTunes. You can also rent it on Google Play or YouTube. And in Canada, you can stream it via the Stars app. Its budget was $63 million. It opened to $11 million. Domestically, it would make $37 internationally 64. So at total, it came to $101 million, which is $157 million with inflation, which means that it definitely wasn't a flop, but it wasn't like a runaway success either. Although with fancy Hollywood accounting, everything doesn't make money so that they can write things off. Anyways, that's a discussion for another time. This might be my favorite plot description on IMDb. An insomniac office worker and a devil-may-care soap maker from an underground fight club that evolves into something much, much more. That's the description of this movie.
It's terrible,
which
but great, yeah.
is not a great way to describe what this movie is about. But anyways, It stars Edward Norton as the narrator, Brad Pitt as Tyler Durden, and Helena Bonham Carter as Marla Singer. Those actors. Dave does something really great for us because over on our Patreon page, he writes up a really nice, let's call it an essay on the actors and what they were doing at the time, as well as the director, where they were at in their career. Any big things you found out about any of these actors?
I don't know. I think we mentioned in the intro. I found out that I'm apparently a big Brad Pitt fan, even though I've spent a lot of my adult life talking shit about him and his acting ability.
I look forward to talking shit about you in my adulthood. Looking
at his filmography, I'm like, I pretty much have paid money for all of these things. And this might just be the surface sort of Googleable thing, but like Angelina Jolie, he just seems like he's a nice guy, which is really fucked up. I know that there's some gossip about where he's at right now with his life, with, I don't know, addiction and breaking out with Angelina, but I'll skip that because I don't have any information on it on my write-up. Ed Norton was interesting because I always think of Ed Norton as this great actor, but then I always think of him as having lost his way over the last 10, 15 years. But when
it's kind of mean, but there's no other way to say this. I really feel like he came onto the scene really strongly because it was like Primal Fear.
He won an Oscar for his first movie.
I don't think he won an Oscar, did he?
Yeah, he won it for Primal Fear for supporting actor. Unless I read that wrong. Pretty sure.
Regardless, Primal Fear, there's this movie, and there's another one I'm thinking of.
Oh, he won a Golden Globe. You're right.
Okay.
He was nominated for the Oscar.
Basically nothing.
Garbage.
Primal Fear, this movie, and there's something else that I'm
American History X.
American History X, yes, that's exactly what it is. So there's these three very well-respected movies. Some of them even made a lot of money. And then I don't think he's ever really gotten to that degree ever again.
Well, here's the interesting thing about him. If you look at his movie list, he's actually in more reasonable movies than I remembered him in. You know, so he's got this kind of crap beginning of 2000. He's in a lot of movies, but I don't know. The score might stand out, and that's not very good. He was apparently in Kingdom of Heaven, which is also not a good movie, and The Illusionist, which I thought was subpar prestige. And of course, he was the Hulk.
Yeah.
But turns out that the reputation is that he's kind of a dick. Like, not personally, but he's apparently very hard to work with because he tries to rewrite everything. And he thinks he knows better than everybody else. And so whatever it was that gives him this ability to be a great actor is apparently also arresting him from widespread acclaim. And in an industry like Hollywood, you got to appeal to the masses. Otherwise, you don't appear anywhere anymore.
You don't go anything.
So, yeah.
And they just say Helena Bonham Carter. I actually really like Helena Bonham Carter.
Of
I think
course
she should be in more things.
Because she was in Sweeney Todd.
I liked a lot of Tim Burton stuff.
nerd.
So she was in those. This movie was written by Jim Ulls, based on the novel by Chuck Palahniuk. Just to briefly go over his work, this was his first produced screenplay, and he would go on to write things like Sweet Talk and Jumper. And apparently the documentary Idiot Savant, The Savage Life of Ryan Leone is the next thing on his list. So I didn't really have a lot to say, although Jumper is not a great movie, but I think that's mostly the actors that they cast in it.
That's
me throwing shade.
We shouldn't go back to.
And then we've talked about David Fincher a little bit, right? Music video director, a lot of Rick Springfield, Madonna, and Paula Abdul, if you scroll through his resume quickly. Before this, he would have made Alien 3, 7, and The Game. I've already talked about how I like The Game a lot. I'll also go to bat. This is an unpopular opinion. I think Alien 3 is not as bad as people make it out to be.
Yes, I agree with you.
Here's the thing. It's not a good alien movie, but it's a good science fiction horror movie, I think.
Other than Alien Doc. But you know what's interesting is reading up quickly on that, apparently David Fincher has disassociated himself with that project because it says that there was so much production company involvement. There are 9 credited screenwriters for that movie.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
That's a mess, dude. So considering what he was working with, that's a beautiful movie. But everything else he's touched is pretty much cool.
So after this, let's just go through them quickly. We have Panic Room, which I think is a solid thriller.
Great movie.
Zodiac, which I think is vastly underappreciated. I think that's a brilliant, great movie. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which I think is just okay. It's not great. I love The Social Network. I think The Social Network is great. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is a pretty decent adaptation. And then Gone Girl, which I was a big fan of Gone Girl. There's also the upcoming Netflix movie Mank, which should be out actually in the next couple months.
He also has this reputation, like Ed Norton, of being
kind of difficult to work with.
Yeah, they're talking about average of 50 to 70 takes per scene. And he's been quoted as saying he doesn't want people to act intuitively or with instinct. He's like, you need to just do it my way, and we're going to do it so many times until you get exactly how I've been envisioning it. And so I wrote this up, Kyle, just to offend you, is he's been described as an auteur. We can get into a debate about that.
Auteur is Kyle's safe word.
We should bring him back up if we ever talk about Stanley Kubrick, because there's a lot of stories about him and how he liked to do like 80 takes of scenes over and over and over again. And then would very famously like take the second or third one.
Well,
but he just had them go through it like multiple times.
It's editing.
There is a great YouTube channel, or I like the YouTube channel, called The Nerd Writer. And he did one on David Fincher once. And ever since he did it, I cannot not notice this in every David Fincher movie, which is the way that he moves his camera, which is that it's always perpendicular, or often, I shouldn't say every single time, but often basically perpendicular with the actor's eyes. So if they stand up, it follows them and then sits down and then pushes in. Or if they're walking towards the camera, it's tracking backwards, but always level with their eyes. And it's actually a little bit different than what other people usually film with. Like, it very much maneuvers the way the protagonist is acting in the scene. So you always feel like you're moving with that actor. Okay, well, that is kind of some background here. So let's get into spoilers. We're in full spoiler mode here. So Tyler Durden is not a real character, Dave. He is a made-up figment of the imagination in the narrator's head, which I think is also a fascinating thing, that he's called the narrator. That is the big reveal. That is the big twist of this film. When you first saw that, was that like the mind-blowing thing?
Oh, yeah.
That's like, oh, wait, he's just a figment of this guy's imagination? Or did you catch on earlier into the film?
I mean, I don't specifically remember whether I was keying into it, but I definitely felt my face melt. I think the way it's building up to it, he's giving you clues. Like David
through the
Fincher's
entire thing, he's
and the
giving you
script.
cues. Yeah.
But you'll never pick up on them without the context of where the story's supposed to be going. But that hotel room scene where he starts blinking and they actually rebuild each of his moments by himself. It's fascinating. And in this 200th time I've rewatched it, it's fun watching it, imagining again. So for example, I noticed Marla Singer's reaction to him in every scene now. It's like a woman standing in front of a schizophrenic, multiple personality disorder person. And so she's reacting to this person. She's not even her own character in the sense that she can't be herself around him. He's like, she's, just had this crazy animal sex, walks downstairs, and he's like a different human being telling her go fuck herself.
Right.
And you're like, of course she's going to look like an insane person, because what are you supposed to do in that situation? Like,
well, especially when you start talking basically about yourself in the third person. Like, he is introduced himself actually as Tyler Durden to her.
Yeah.
He's like, Tyler's not here. And she's like, what are you talking about? Tyler's not here. Right.
She was amazing, that scene too, where you see the panic and that realization that this is well beyond the insanity she was willing to endure for that relationship. She has this great look on her face where it's just like soul crushing. It was kind of fun to watch that.
I brought this up kind of near the beginning about, text versus subtext. For you, what is this movie trying to communicate?
So this time in watching it, I'm getting sick of the phrase toxic masculinity, but there's certainly the embodiment of all the pressures of what it's supposed to be like to be, a primal warrior man. And they do that subversive thing where they're making fun of it at the same time they're inhibiting the role. Mm-hmm. This is describing the psychology of cults. And I remember I was talking to my psychiatrist about a video I watched about fake martial arts. I don't know if I've told you about this, but there's this whole thing about fake martial arts where post Bruce Lee, these schools would open up and these so-called masters would like wave their hands in the air and their students will all fall down because of their powerful forces. But it got to the point where I think in the early mid-'80s, these masters would then go out and challenge real fighters, utterly convinced that they actually had these secret powers. And their videos...
And they were, I think you have told me about this before, but was it that they knew they were bullshitty, but then through this act of will that they convinced themselves they could? Or was it like they always thought they could and then fully convinced themselves? To question.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the first proponents were probably scam artists just to get money in these fake schools. But by the time they're going to pick out fights with real people, they're utterly convinced they can do this. But what stuck out to me in those videos was they've built schools. People follow them in spite of them getting their ass handed to them. And if you look at the videos of their students, they are broken people. None of them look healthy.
Those sound like my kind of people.
And so when I brought it up with my psychiatrist, he said one of the interesting sort of dynamics in cults is that when a person is struggling psychologically, they want to tie themselves with a single word, concept, or person, and then define their own personality to it. Trump supporters. And so they go out and they can't allow themselves to be wrong. And whatever this concept, person, or movement, Trump supporters, says, they have to essentially religiously adhere to it. And this movie shows us that. I mean, at the beginning, like I said, if we turn this movie off in halfway point, Brad Pitt's character is almost like this warrior monk. He's like, yeah, I take a lot of things from that, right? Like this anti-capitalist thing, materialism, all these things that feel like they're poisoning us. And then to get this primal thing where it's like, I want you to hit me in the face as hard as you can. And you're just like, what the fuck is going on? So there's an excitement to that. It swells because his little army are, again, ironically, the sheep that he calls the office workers, right? They will do anything that Tyler Durden says, and it eventually becomes domestic terrorism. I love it because it's making fun of it. Now, when I was 22, did I like the first part or the second half? I don't know. I mean, I don't remember. I want to believe I was wise enough to separate those two things, but self-harm and all this, I mean, I'm pretty sure I would have been attracted to both the the bad and the good of this movie. I like to believe, though, that I'm a intelligent, academically trained, a nuanced human being who is above it all.
Well, I mean, there's a few things I want to pick up from that. You said a lot there. All of it bullshit, but no. So I want to talk about that toxic masculinity thing a bit, because I think that really is where this film starts at. That is where it begins. And I really want to put our mindsets back into 1999, because I just do not feel that men were in that mind space yet of being like, we are allowed to show our feelings.
Right.
To the degree that I feel like in the year 2020, men can and are kind of expected to, and that we feel is much more mentally helpful. The narrator, or Edward Norton's character, his first thing he's doing is going to these self-help groups so that he can cry. That is, he's going there so he can actually feel something, because yes, society is beating him down and he feels like he's just this cog in the machine and he needs something to express himself. I think how funny this is, like before social media and stuff like that this is, I think, something that people are still struggling with, but just would not have been able to communicate effectively. Like, I need some way to feel like I am a human being. And that for him is pretending that he has disease and going and being able to cry with other men and actually having that touch. But I think that what he discovers is that there's actually more help that he needs, because this is the thing with addicts, and this is going to sound more negative than what I mean it to be. You'll probably have more insight into this than I do. With addictive personalities, if you stop doing something, you still fill that hole with something else. Like, you are constantly trying to make peace with that. So when he feels like he's gotten to a certain point and he's not getting that release that he needs, like I think he's projecting onto the Marla character, like, well, you're coming here too, and now I can't come to these places.
You're faking,
and he's projecting, right? Yeah. So now I need something else, which then basically goes into like the Fight Club thing of like, I feel because I am touching people and, expending this, and I'm angry and I just need some way to express this. And it's in a not very healthy way, but it's still making them feel alive in the person that they're touching other people and that they're communicating. There's this communal aspect to it. And I will say this, and I'm sure Chuck Palahniuk would actually disagree with me, the original writer of this novel. I feel there is a gay subtext to this that is very obvious while watching this movie.
Here we go with the gay again.
That is never explicitly gone into, but it is there. Like, there is something going on there between him and Tyler that is more than just like, oh, he's a friend and I've made him up in my head.
He wouldn't disagree with you because he's gay.
Oh, I didn't know that. I had no idea about
blew
that.
Your mind.
I did blow my mind. I didn't actually know that. Okay,
he came
interesting.
Out in the 2000s after this movie was released.
Gotcha.
The only thing that I would disagree, if that's the word, is that I think the implication is that Tyler Durden exists well before this. I think that the house is already there. His alter ego's already got this sort of set up life. He's already traveling with soap. Like, there's a lot of duality already, even from the point that you meet Tyler. Like, you see Tyler sort of appearing in some of the build-up scenes to their actual first date on the plane. And by the end, you realize, I mean, who knows how many personalities he actually has, the narrator.
Yeah.
But that this 1 hour sleep a night, myth.
I never sleep, but I do dream of electric sheep.
Would give him the opportunity to live. Like, even the idea of creating a terror cell, Fight Club, being a maitre d', having a day job, traveling around the States, starting all of these chapters. I mean, there are so many different layers in which I don't think that it necessarily comes out of the addict recovery sort of thing. I agree with you that, this displacement and addict mindset of, I guess the metaphor is often filling a hole or filling a gap. Mm-hmm. That one book I read was talking about, in a different way, sort of running from fear or being in denial. So instead of confronting what it is that's actually harming you, you go and drink, use drugs, overeat, have too much sex, or in this case, go to support groups and lie to people to get the ability to presumably cry. I also agree in the 90s for the movie we just watched, Boys Don't Cry. There's a strong theme in this concept of what it means to be a man that comes out of the boomer generation.
Right.
That comes out of I mean, I'm not sure historical masculinity because, as we know or presume the idea of a man has evolved actually through different civilizations. It's not always been held with such testicular rigor. But certainly,
put that on a shirt, please.
Certainly by the end of the 90s, the world I grew up in, if you cry, someone punches you in the face and calls you a girl, a homosexual, a fucking dog, whatever it is. Like, you're just not allowed to do that. That pressure's there for sure. And we do see, as we've talked about a lot this year, I think that cultural boiling point's about to happen where, I don't know if it's Gen X or millennials, people are just sick of it. People are just sick of
this would have been Gen X that they were talking about in this story for sure at that time. I think it's so fascinating to watch this movie in the year 2020 with the US election that is mere weeks away as this episode gets released, with that same type of fervor and that same type of devotion that Tyler Durden has and builds up around him, that Trump has and builds up around him. But I also thought there was a similarity in just the idea of Tyler Durden of creating this, I'll call it like an avatar for yourself, and being able to live like your true life through that character, being able to, actually be the person you want to be. He makes up in his head and is able to actually act on it. I don't see how that's not what social media is in very many ways, where, you can even attach your real name to it and yet are still able to lash out, be vicious. And that might not actually be who you really are in real life, but that's how it gets unleashed in the online sphere so many times. I think there is a similarity there that, of course, this book was not intended to emulate, but I think that's an evolution of that idea.
I don't know. I mean, I think what's intelligent to me standing out, like in the same vein, is that think of the irony of them complaining about materialism and advertising. You'll notice that all of the ads were of men's naked bodies and not your traditional guest models. Mm-hmm. They aren't blaming sort of the
except for Brad Pitt. Like, no one is like, bigger.
Brad Pitt, and then all of the models for the whatever it was, I can't remember, Guess or Armani, but it was all men's butts and abs and all this stuff. And so I think it's intentional that I used to think that it was hypocritical that in the movie they would point at an ad and say, this is bullshit, and then Brad would take off his shirt and you're like, they have the exact same body. But I think now I read it as intentional, because exactly like you're saying, I think Brad Pitt is himself a product of this marketing thing that's infecting Ed Norton's, the narrator's brain, which is an effigy of what he's supposed to be like, even though he is not like that. Again, I mean, who knows? He's insane. So it's like, I don't know what he's like.
He doesn't want to be like that. Because I mean, he does fight back, right? Like, he understands, like, this is actually not the way I want to go to. Deep in my subconscious, I guess I've created this person that does want to tear things down. I've never been like the revolutionary person. I know, shocking confession I'm making here on the podcast. But like, I love one of the funniest things they say, right? At the very beginning, he's talking about like furnishing his apartment and being caught up in like the consumption of the world. It's like, what dining set defines me as a person, right? You get into that stupid mentality. Like, not that I've ever done it, but I've been in the same room with people like planning weddings and stuff. It's like, what color defines us as a couple? I'm like, who cares?
Everybody does it. Everybody does it. Well, podcasters do it with your microphones and your computers.
Right. I mean, I'm just saying that there's the culture that we live in has these things that everyone does. But really, when you pull back, it's like, oh, this is stupid. Like, no one really cares about this stuff. And everyone's trying desperately to be like in the moment. But then Tyler Durden, I'm sorry to get stuck on this like high horse I'm on, basically comes off as being one of those people that I only want to talk to for 20 seconds, which is like, wake up, sheeple. He throws out these epithets and these like stupid like little like Taoist Buddhism things. There's like, I don't know, like you're also going to go blow up a building. So like how cohesive is this strategy that you have?
He starts off as, what's the character in Mystery Men? The Phoenix, right?
Right. Yeah.
The things you own end up owning you. And this is actually a profound concept in our world. Maybe it's, again, we haven't read the book, but maybe the implication is that these wholesome thoughts, and wholesome is a broad term, meaning, you can't just make yourself happy all the time, because then you're insane too. I mean, people who only see optimism are generally certifiable as well. There needs to be a balance. Right. There's an up and down.
You cannot, you can't stay happy all the time. Conversely, you can't stay sad all the time either. I think there has to be that balance of forces.
a manic and a depressive, and you can do both and be bipolar, but we won't get into DSM because I don't understand that either. But I think...
but BDSM, I am all about.
I've heard that about you. I think at the beginning, there's almost a naivety to Tyler Durden's character, where it's like...
I agree.
He's like this, he's this rebellious idea. I mean, I have those thoughts all the time. As you know, I express them vocally a lot about how, we need to be different, and everything we're doing is leading us into hell, and we're seeing the apocalypse, and capitalism is poisoning us and all this kind of shit. But
yeah, this is a very anti-capitalist movie at the end of the day, yes.
And I think the fascinating thing is, I think the writer is showing us that if you project that into unrestrained action, you end up killing and destroying everything around you, which is where that subtext comes in.
I do have some of the quotes written down, which is like, maybe there's a possibility that God doesn't like you. You know what I mean? Like, maybe your life is bad because God doesn't like you, or you can just make up what you find meaningful in your life and pursue that.
Just to be clear, I don't like you either.
I think that's fascinating, right? It's like, once you lose that sense of connection and hope with the rest of the world, then you become this cult member where you will take on a new God. And in this case, it's the persona of Tyler Durden, who's insane. Right. Well,
I think also what this points to, there's another book that I read called The Death of Expertise. And what that author, Tom Nichols, purports, we have spent the last, at bare minimum, 30 years, but probably even longer than that, being like, hey, Western culture, you're an individual and you pursue what you want and what you think you need to do and achieve is the right thing. But what that is kind of conversely done is make a bunch of narcissists out of all of us. Because now it's like, well, whatever I think is right. I don't care what you think or how you feel or how this even impacts you. It doesn't matter. It matters what I think and what I feel. So fuck you. And I think as such, what's interesting about this movie is that as much as we push towards that of being like, you're your own person and you lead your own life and you do what you want to do, I honestly think that there's more of people that just want to be led, that just want to have someone tell them what to do so they can just do it and they understand where their place in society is. And I'm not even going to get into the political argument of that, but just you can see that in this movie, which is Tyler Durden is kind of saying that, like, do what you want to do, live your life, but also do exactly what I say or else I'm going to kill you. Or we'll have his flunkies on the police department castrate you. Like that authoritarian rule revels in this. Is like, you're your own person and you get to do what you want to do, but actually just do what I want to do.
It's such a great parallel to the office culture he's escaping from, isn't it? I mean,
right.
I don't know if we're reading too much into the intent. I've never met Chuck.
Right.
I've never read the book.
Chuck E.P., yeah.
Yeah, you know how we do. But I think, having watched this movie so many times and been involved in it so much, I can't help but think that that's the point.
We look at the surface level, which is like it's slick, and there's a bit of funniness into it, and just a tad of misogyny thrown into it. But underneath all of that is like, actually, what we're trying to communicate here is much more than what is just on the surface of this movie.
Honestly, I mean, other than the fact of not having any real, we could get into debate of Marla Singer, but I'm not even sure there's misogyny in it, to be honest with you. When I look at this movie, I think it's just within the headspace of an entirely disconnected, broken man. And certainly through that lens, there's a problem. But, the female characters around it, whether it's Marla Singer or even Chloe and the cancer group or whatever, there's actually quite a lot of empathy. The first time you watch it, there's a comedic beat where she's begging people to have sex with her. But like, as you watch it over and over again, I mean, to even put that in the scene, to humanize the suffering, it's not just images of Ed Norton showing up at these things and taking advantage of people. But, all of the people in here, all of the victims of these diseases are depicted as real human beings. I mean, you would think that they weren't even extras that are just milling around the room. It's done meticulously and I think with purpose.
And great performance by Meatloaf, of all people.
I loved it.
Wild, yeah.
Yeah. Bob, I mean, certainly you could talk about the language, particularly at the beginning, but there's toxicity of that language. A was way more normal in the 90s, for better, for worse, clearly for worse. But B, I think, also speaks to Tyler Durden's brain about how he talks to himself, right? And I think it plays more on this tension of what it means to be a man. I mean, I still struggle with that. I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think the idea of what a man is and how you fit into this world is, as you said, always evolving anyways, but much more so even in the last 5 years as it's kind of ramped up and being constantly changing. These things we've just taken for granted is not things that you can take for granted anymore. And I personally, I think it is actually pushing more into the positive end of things, but that still puts your feet are not on cement anymore, they're in sand, so it's like constantly moving and falling and being like, is this the right way? For me, what this points to, and I think this is a person problem, but oftentimes a male problem too, of just feeling so incredibly alone even though you're surrounded by multiple people. I think that comes up over and over again in this film, where the Edward Norton character keeps having real people surround him, but he feels like he's the only person and that he can't really express himself and be his true self. Even when he creates his own fake identity person, he still feels alone, even with Tyler Durden in the same household. So I want to go through some other quotes because we're running long here. Number one, this is one of the major quotes that I was going to say and bring up, going back to the point of, I think that there is maybe a gay subtext here, which is the conversation they have with each other in the bathroom while Tyler Durden is bathing himself. And the narrator says, I can't get married. I'm a 30-year-old boy. And then Tyler Durden says, we're a generation of men raised by women. I'm starting to wonder if another woman is what we really need.
It's not subtle.
I don't know. What do you make of that?
Well, I think one of the interesting themes that have come out of not just Boomer to Gen X, but just parenting in general, is the ever-shifting role we have on each other, like the influence we have on each other. So the Boomer generation is this, at least by stereotype, man disappearing to work, right, woman housewife, and even the concept of presumably raising your child is much a different definition than what it means today. And so for myself, growing up in that generation, I don't have parents that coddle me. I have parents that often resentfully support me, which in hindsight was a grand blessing, because there are a lot of parents that couldn't even do that, right? And so that figurehead between the parental group and the child has tended to be the woman. But this creates this weird disconnect for male role models, I think, of that generation. But the broader spectrum, which I think is fascinating, is out of the Tyler Durden speech, we got a generation of, what do you call them, helicopter parents. So all of the people embittered by this blaming that their parents were never in their lives became too ever present in their children's lives. And there's this middle generation, I don't know if they're millennials or Ys or Zs, who gives a fuck. They feel entitled to something. You know, they feel like they're snowflakes. They feel like they're supposed to get more and be enriched
because
to
they've always been given more, right?
Right. And now raising Emerson, we are finding ourselves surrounded by still a little bit of that, but there's a new evolution of people trying to find a new balance between those two things. Certainly, at least in my mind, that's what I'm trying to do. I want to be here, and we are all together all the time, but I also am very mindful that when I get Emerson in trouble, it's like, you need to do this yourself. Like, I'll stand here and support you, but I'm not doing your homework for you. I'm not going to build this Lego for you. Because if you just expect to say, do this, and I show up and do it, then what the fuck are you preparing yourself for in life, right? Yeah, there are lines, but certainly that one stuck out to me too. I think it's got a lot of layers, but learning that Chuck came out, I think it's definitely a strong line that he snuck in there.
Yeah, I think it's kind of both, right? It's
that Freddie Mercury thing. You know, you look back at Queen, and after he came out, you realize like all his lyrics, he's singing about being gay, but he knows that it's not accepted in that era, right? So it's
like Liberace, who you could tell was gay from 50 feet away, and people back then were like, he just needs a good woman to settle down with.
George Michael too, right? You watch all George Michael's videos, and he's got a 50-50 split of Victoria's Secret's models and naked men, and you're like, well, maybe, maybe
I don't know.
But that's the struggle of closet culture.
I think the other thing, this is again a Generation X thing, which I think you technically are an old Generation X, or young Generation X, I think, technically, right?
Late.
Because I'm an old millennial, I think that makes you a young Generation X. Regardless.
Isn't there a Y? Was there no Y?
Yeah, but there's Y. It's Y after millennial. We skipped a letter for millennials.
That's weird.
And now there's Generation Z. Anyways. I'm still Generation Pepsi. The other quote I just needed to mention was, "We're the middle children of history. No war or Great Depression. Our lives are the Great Depression."
I could start a new war if you'd like.
I do think that is a Generation X feeling. Like, you look at that in a lot of literature. There's this, Douglas Copeland is a Canadian writer who wrote about Generation X. He's the guy who coined the term Generation X. And a lot of his novels are about that feeling of like, we're kind of this middle generation that no one cares about. And that ultimately has actually turned out to be true, which is like Generation X is really never in the equation. Right now it's a war against boomers and millennials and younger. And the Generation X generation is kind of just like shuffled off to the side.
It's interesting. I think this theme in different terms has come up in all the movies we watched this year, which is, I don't think it's a middle child syndrome, although I can understand how that metaphor works. I think we had the so-called projection of a perfect society where nobody actually had to worry about anything, and that boredom and disconnect from struggle and purpose.
And that was really a 90s thing, right? Like, as soon as the Berlin Wall fell down, yes, there was like those like flash wars in the Gulf and stuff, but we could kind of disassociate ourselves from that a little bit because they only lasted for a few months. But really, like, when you think about I guess I had these rose-colored glasses because I was a kid at the time, so I was not necessarily looking at international affairs. But there was at least a good 6 or 7 year period there where it was just like, yeah, like, whatever, the world, like, nothing terrible is happening to me. So it's easy to be like these halcyon days of old. And then the 2000s hit, and like, boy, have shit hit the fan since then.
Well, I don't think it's because you were young. I think it's because we're North American. And I think that
true. Yeah.
The cultural wall, I mean, we talked about the Berlin Wall a lot this year, but I think the cultural wall was just being tied to America. And America at that time had enough cultural energy to shut the rest of the world out. You talk to anybody who's living in Africa or the Balkans or anywhere in the Middle East, there has not yet been this lull of beautiful, halcyon quiet, as you put it. Like, it just never has happened yet.
Right.
But we got to live in this bubble until September 11th, when they broke that bubble. And whatever the conspiracy or the action is irrelevant. Then it became real because it came onto our zeitgeist. And we haven't been able to, recover is an unfair word because it presumes that we were better off before. But we certainly have changed and become so global. And, looking at all these celebrity bios, every single one of them is somehow trying to save the world with their money. They're all over Africa, the Middle East, trying to combat environmentalism, global hunger. I don't think that that's necessarily as prominent pre-2001. It's just something where we've had to become aware that we are not the only people on the earth. To your earlier point, there's that post-war glory that we're all special snowflakes and nothing that's happening anywhere else in the world matters because, I've got a 2,000 square foot house on 10 acres and a Mercedes-Benz or Rolls-Royce and, I'm fucking good.
Were you ever into culture freaking, or like, did you read Adbusters magazine or anything like that at all? Does that ring a bell?
Adbusters magazine rings. What's culture freaking? What do you mean?
That's kind of what they support. I might be using the wrong word now that you called me out on that. They called it something, social culture jamming. Sorry, they called it culture jamming. You wanted to do these like random acts of subversion, whether it was like
punk rock,
kind of like the Banksy thing, right? Like posting up a fake poster or something like that, or cutting off the cord of a phone booth or something. Just like these little mini acts of rebellion to be like, culture, like F you, like we're not going to like be prescribed a certain way that we're supposed to act, sort of thing. And I was kind of all about that. Never did any of it. I have to be very like, I was too much of a soy boy beta cuck to be like, I can do any of this. But I liked reading up about it, and I subscribed to the magazine for a bit just to read up on what they were talking about. But this is what that movie kind of reminded me of, because that's kind of what it starts off as, and then it very much subverts itself into like, ooh, okay, we're going way too far into evilness.
Yeah, there's, I don't have any research about this particular psychosis, but I definitely have a sense that things like self-harm, so punk rock, rebellion, counterculture stuff has, that's a historical human perspective, nihilism, whatever you want to call it. Even stoicism, you could argue, the Stoics in fucking 300 BC were like, look, you guys are fucking this all up. You got to live by your principles. So they would do the opposite things. But there's this degradation of people's personalities where they're, self-harming, and addiction, as far as we understand the stats, has been increasing. And I remember watching this documentary probably 15 years ago, about these kids in San Francisco. And this become a bit of a trope now, but they're just like, yeah, I sit here, I'm homeless, I'm like 16, but I have to cut myself so I can feel something. That sort of disconnection from any purpose in their life is a fascinating and frightening thing to think about. I think that's what this movie kind of brings us to, is that there's a positive sort of counterculture where, you can strip yourself of things that are dragging you down. You can go and feel something, whether it's to cry or to get hit in the face or to physically interact. And then there's this slipping fully off the rocks and diving into this self-destruction and self-harm where you can't come back, right? I have a feeling that that's intended. I think it's the purpose of the movie.
Yeah, I kind of just want to rewatch it again now after having this conversation. This has nothing to do with the movie, but it popped into my head and I have to ask it. So, like, for you, as David Yun, do you feel like having a family, having a son has given your life meaning more so than you had, like, even, like, I don't know, 15 years ago? Or is that beside the point that you have to find meaning before you even go down the route of having a family?
I don't know. I think in principle, the second, but I think just to quickly, like, so for example, as people may or may not know, Helen and I have been together for 20 years this year. And what was interesting is leading up towards our 10th anniversary, we decided maybe we should legally get married, and we've been living together anyways. What was strange in that first moment is when we did that legal ceremony in a courthouse, I don't know, man, something felt like it changed, even though it was exactly the same. Like, we still went back to the same house, we still have our same friends, but there's this thing. So when we created Emerson, and when he arrived,
it was in a vial.
There's
a big cauldron that you like.
There's a context change, right? Because kind of like getting married, there's maybe it's the same way we talk about masculinity, but there are suddenly new roles and responsibilities you have to confront, and you have to confront yourself because you have definitions. So, for example, with marriage, even with dating, you're going to have a definition of what it means to be a good partner, what it means to be a good person, a good employee. That's going to be informed by your parents. That's going to be informed by your friends and your culture.
Your coding.
Marriage, parenting, all of that. Even work. Like, look at me. You of all people know, Kyle, I haven't held a job in probably 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. I'm happier now than I've ever been in many spiritual ways. But that vehemence and, to your point, sort of rebellious nature comes from how I've been informed about what I define a job to be. I feel like it's something that I have to confront now, talking about denial and, addiction and all this stuff. It's something I'm learning to confront now, but it's not a straightforward answer. You need to have values to make the next step of your life. When you make the next step, you get new values. It's an ever-changing proposition. Maybe the biggest lie Hollywood and North American culture tells us is that you only have to make the right decision once and your life is fine. When the opposite is true. Your life is always moving. I'm not going to be negative and say it's going to shit, but it's all constantly moving. So you always have to reassess where you are, who you are, and what your values are. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm not good at. I'm watching Fight Club and I'm like, I still believe this shit. Fuck materialism. And it's like, you know what? I'm 42.
Self-improvement is masturbation,
right.
Damn it.
And I'm like, I'm running every day. Like, I don't know. It's like, just gotta let it go. Elsa and Anna said it best. You just gotta let it go, man. Just gotta let it go.
Where's that essay comparing Fight Club and Frozen?
We should write that. Yeah.
We're done here.
Okay, so the machinist told us we have to wrap up. I think we do need to end off then asking that question we often ask on this show is, do you think this movie is still culturally relevant?
Yes. And I have a bias because I'm from the 90s. I'm a heterosexual male and I'm a recovering addict. So I can't not love this movie. How's that for a double, triple negative, whatever it is?
I know. I'm thinking the same thing, though. I think this has a lot to say. And yes, like, again, going back to just the text, there's a lot of stuff that might seem antiquated nowadays as far as like what his office job is like. The fact that they even talk about cutting film strips and having different reels and like showing like a little burnout that's on the top right corner, which does not exist anymore in filmmaking, but like did exist back then. Like all that stuff doesn't really hold water now, but I think the themes and what it's talking about 1,000% are still relevant and we can talk about it. And we just spend an hour and 15 minutes talking about it.
I remember this one thing. Kids today, never mind not knowing what payphones are, they wouldn't even get the first clue that you can't call a public payphone back. Right? I mean, just like little nuances like that are interesting. But
I thought you could. Can't you do that? I thought you could do that. Isn't that why there's the number that's written on the front of payphones?
No, I don't think so. At least from my recollection, you can't return a call to a payphone. There's going to be a number.
Oh, you're right. You couldn't star 69 it. I don't think you can star 69 it. Yeah, you're right.
And,
star 69 isn't even a thing anymore. I don't think.
You just have call display. Siri will tell you.
Never say that name in my presence again.
Not only who, but they'll tell you where they call from, who they are, who their family members are. There's an algorithm.
You're in my contact list as fuck that guy. But,
yeah. Well, I try to make sure that's how I appear in all the contact lists I'm a part of.
Well, I guess that means that we need to rate this film somehow. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I think we need to pause just for a moment and discuss that there's many different ways that you can help support this podcast. One of those ways is that wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on iTunes or some other podcast platform, if you can go and leave a review for us, it literally takes 5 seconds. All you have to do is go to that store of your choice, leave a review. It really helps as far as discovery goes. You can also tell people if you wanted to shout out on Twitter, Facebook, out your window, if you have such a thing, and be like, hey, listen to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine. And then get the response of like, what? Who are you? Regardless, do that. It helps us out a whole heck of a lot. You can email us at kyleanddavevsthemachine@gmail.com. And you can help support the show by going to our Patreon page, which is linked into the show notes here as well. So any of those things are available to you, and you can help us out immensely by doing any and all of those things. Now, with all that preamble, David, we are going to rate this film, and you can follow us on Letterboxd, the website that helps people track the films that they're watching. Letterboxd.com/KDVSTM is how you can find us and see every movie we've talked about so far. I think this is 38. I think this is the 38th movie that we've watched here this year.
For this podcast, probably watched a lot more movies.
Well, yeah. I have. I'm in triple digits. What would you rate this movie out of 5?
Well, obviously a 5. But I have a quick thought, a dystopian Blade Runner thought, when you mentioned Windows. How long before the algorithm has Facebook owning my window and I have to click an ad in order to open it? That's coming, right? I'm sorry to put that idea into the machine's head, but how fucking creepy is that? Anyways, yes, I have
You're
to
rating
give it
a 5?
Yeah, I have to give it a 5.
I don't know what it is about me. I'm so reticent of giving 5s out, even though I gave like 2 in a row, I think, a few weeks ago. Anyways.
Well, you gave South Park a 5, so you've already discredited any kind
I'm discredited.
Yeah.
You throw me off the show. I scratch out my name. It's just and Dave versus the Machine. I'm rating it 4.5. I think this is a really strong movie. I love it a lot. I do think that people have gotten into my head a little bit because I've seen a lot of articles here in recent years a little bit pushing back on this film and the relevance that it has. But now that I have done it myself and rewatched it, I just think there's lots to talk about in this. And I'm probably going to be rewatching this movie throughout the rest of my life until I'm senile and create my own Tyler Durden to watch it with me.
Just to that point, while I was researching it, there are philosophical treatises almost based around this film.
Sure.
Academics talk about this movie still. They do not talk about message in a bottle.
Well, I mean, they should. I mean, the deep, rich text that is message in the bottle. Dave, that means we have a tie.
Okay.
So this movie then is tied with Galaxy Quest.
Ooh,
would you rate this above or below Galaxy Quest? By the way, each of us rated this the exact same. That's funny.
I would put it above Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I love Galaxy Quest, but I think that there's a lot more richness to this. That means then that Fight Club will enter our list at the number 3 position.
Who's above it? Office Space?
Office Space at number 2, Matrix at number 1. Okay. So our list is kind of coming along nicely here.
You know what we should do is review our ratings at the end of the year to see if we were too soft at the beginning and too hard at the end.
We can talk about that off podcast. Well, let me push this button. Let's see what we are watching next week. Well, this is very hilarious because we actually mentioned him already on this podcast. So we're going from one auteur to another auteur. Next week, we're watching Eyes Wide Shut.
Kubrick,
and,
yeah. Group Sex, great.
And Group Sex. and Tom Cruise. I mean, talking about cults.
I always thought it was fascinating that Beck's father co-founded Scientology, but split from L. Ron Hubbard because L. Ron Hubbard's insane. So he's a proponent of Scientology, but not connected allegedly to Hollywood Scientology.
A splinter group.
Hyperbaric chambers and fucking weird stuff going on over there. And, you know, good money.
I look forward to watching it. I have actually not seen this. I've seen a bunch of Kubrick stuff but for some reason I've never seen Eyes Wide Shut. I guess in the meantime, should I put like a stake on your eye? Like in a old fancy cartoon?
I was actually just going to comment about asking you why you have so many feathers up your butt.
Don't kink shame me, David.